So I just spent 3 days at a Medicare hospice billing and documentation conference, so I can't tell you, there was no joy in that room. Let me tell you what a pleasure it is to be here with you today. So I'm going to talk about the varieties of palliative care, and I'll start with my disclosures. Let's see here. There we go. So and I'll mention at the top here, while I serve on the Oregon Psilocybin Advisory Board, and I'm also participating in the current Rules Advisory Committee that's going on now, I am here representing my day job, which is with the Oregon Hospice and Palliative Care Association. So I have never tried psilocybin. I've never had prescriptive privileges. And I have been an RN actually for a total of 41 years, and 36 of those in home care and end-of-life care with hospice. So I just have one slide that shows a gap, because I'm going to talk about some of the gaps and opportunities in palliative care and hospice. And by the way, is anybody working in palliative care and hospice here today? Yay! You're my peeps! It's a very regulated field for the most part. So this is Lake Chinook for those of you from out of state. It's about a 3-hour drive in central Oregon. It's a reservoir that was created by confluence of 3 rivers. Anyway, it's a beautiful location. We also call it Oregon's Grand Canyon, but when I was thinking of a pictorial way to show a gap, I thought of Lake Chinook. So there's this huge gap between traditional healthcare, the medicalized model of healthcare, and the new Oregon non-medicalized psilocybin model. As consumers, we're used to finding out, for those of us lucky enough to have health insurance coverage, we usually can find out what's covered, how much is covered, if there's any co-pays, if we meet the eligibility criteria, et cetera. And then, if we need or want something, whether it's an item or a medication or a service, we usually get somebody with prescriptive privileges to order that for us. Well, there's several problems with the medicalized model, especially when it comes to psilocybin, and the first 2 don't have anything to do with palliative care. So first of all, palliative care is not a defined benefit under almost any model. It's not a standalone service that this is what you get if you get palliative care. It varies from provider to provider as to what their eligibility criteria are. It varies from payer to payer as to what might be covered, if anything. So let me ask somebody, and if you have health insurance of some kind, raise your hand. I know we have Slido, but I'm not going to go that route. I'm old school. And now raise your hand if you know precisely what your insurer will cover for palliative care, the fine print of what will be covered. Yeah, nobody knows. It's this obscure thing that you have to try to find out, or ask them to make an exception to pay for something. So the next problem with the medicalized model, and again, I know there are many others, because the DEA has labeled psilocybin as a Schedule I medication, there really isn't any coverage for it unless you're participating in a study. So a potential safe harbor is being pursued in the right to try advocacy that Catherine Tucker and her colleagues are involved with. And Catherine's here, by the way. And this involves both federal judicial review and a federal congressional action. So we'll hope for success with the right to try advocacy efforts. So thank you for that. So having said all that, as we all know, the use of psilocybin in Oregon isn't going to require a prescription by anybody. Anybody who wants to check into it will be able to complete some information, have a preparation session, and hopefully find a psilocybin service center and a facilitator who will make the decision to provide that service to them. So let's talk about another gap now. And I've already mentioned that no one is going to cover psilocybin as a medication. There isn't an insurance company that's going to cover it, although Tom Eckert is working with the foundation and Nate to help provide some coverage. Hopefully that will be successful. So there's going to be very little access for anybody who doesn't have the disposable income to pay for it. And as we all know, financial access is, of course, an issue of equity. And the advisory board and the equity subcommittee have really been trying to address this issue to the extent possible through the rules process. And so how we solve this challenge in Oregon is still very much to be determined. So another aspect, and an important aspect for palliative care patients or persons who have a serious illness or a terminal illness, it is physical access. In Oregon, consumers can only receive psilocybin in a service center. There's no allowance in the law to allow someone to get it at home if it causes huge hardship for them to get out of the home. So we have this physical gap that we're going to need to address through legislation, and that's not impossible. My small state association, we're a small nonprofit, we've gotten 3 bills passed in the last 3 years. So I believe we can address this with future legislation. There's a gap of education. First, for consumers, many of us who voted for ballot measure 109, and I'm one of those, we voted for the concept, but we really didn't know very much about its use. And also whether we might personally want to use it in the future. So as consumers, we need a lot more education and information about its effects, where we can get it, whether there are any differences among providers, how much it will cost, should we get our primary care provider's blessing before we do that, or will that matter? So we have this gap of education for consumers. And there's a huge gap, another gap of education for healthcare providers. And not just for those who prescribe. So every interaction someone has with anybody who works in the healthcare community can impact one's perceptions about whether to even mention they're considering trying psilocybin or whether they have already tried it. So we need to sort of get everybody in the healthcare community to not pass judgment unless they're more educated and unless the consumer asks for it. And speaking of the gap in education, there's a huge gap for education for healthcare providers in research. It's really research that needs to be done to normalize the use of psychedelics in healthcare. Even in the studies done so far, for example, with palliative care or hospice-eligible patients, those patients were at a much earlier trajectory in their illness than the typical hospice patients that we see in Oregon, who has an average or a median length of stay of just a little over 3 weeks. And over a quarter of hospice patients in Oregon die in the first 7 days of service. So very short time frame. Another gap of education is for insurance companies. How many studies are going to have to be done before covering psilocybin as a therapy or medication is acceptable to payers? I don't know if we have any payers here, but maybe they could help answer that question. So what requirements must be met? I think it has to no longer be a Schedule I medication, for one thing. So we have to have legislative and regulatory changes take place before the payer community is going to be willing to cover the cost of an administrative session. And of course, that gets back to the issue of access and equity. So let's consider another gap in the palliative care arena, the care that we provide for bereaved family members. The hospice Medicare benefit, and over 90% of hospice in this country is covered by, covered by Medicare. Even for those who die with under that benefit, their loved one isn't going to get the same kind of care all across the country. Hospices are required to provide at least 12 months of bereavement care, but it really varies from program to program what's provided. Some hospices just do mailings. Some do mailings and phone calls. Some provide counseling visits, even through telehealth. Some run support groups, some don't. So it really varies across the country, and there really aren't any firm standards about what is covered or provided for bereaved family members. And I think there's a great potential for psilocybin to be given or to be taken by somebody who's experiencing complicated grief. And right now, I feel like hospice providers may be a little hesitant to suggest that. But I think there's great potential to alleviate their distress and to help address issues of depression and anxiety. And getting back to a gap with healthcare providers, similarly, and this isn't palliative care related, but what can we do to make sure healthcare providers who are struggling with issues of anxiety, depression, or burnout have access to psilocybin? Could it help decrease the amount of clinicians, healthcare providers who are leaving the field? We need to advocate for employment policies that don't prohibit the use of psilocybin in someone's off-duty hours. So to wrap up, I'm an optimistic person despite having worked in healthcare for 41 years, and I should clarify that I don't think any of these gaps are insurmountable. I think our challenge in Oregon is to create a roadmap for a new way to provide and experience palliative and end-of-life care. So as I've mentioned, I spent 36 years working in end-of-life care, and I'm nearing the end of my career. But I hope to spend my remaining years working to overcome these barriers. Psilocybin use in addiction and end-of-life care, I think, is going to be the glide path to getting it legal across the country. But not everybody suffers from addiction. Last time I checked, all of us are going to die. I look forward to working with you on this journey. Thank you very much.
Yes, Barb. Thank you. We're all gonna die. It used to bother me. Now it's, thank you so much. All right. The good times continue. Again, a true pleasure and honor to bring up a friend who is doing incredible work. This is CLAUDIA CUENTAS. CLAUDIA is a Peruvian artist, a researcher, an educator, and specializing in the treatment of healing, trauma, cultural identity, and decolonizing of healing. She's also a licensed marriage and family therapist. CLAUDIA is trained in somatic experiencing, drama therapy, and expressive arts therapy, and holds an MA in counseling psychology. She also has extensive studies in indigenous healing practices from her native, hopefully you can help me pronounce this later, Aymara and Quechua lineages of South America. CLAUDIA started her journey as an educator and advocate of art as a tool for healing and liberation. In becoming a therapist at the California Institute of Integral Studies, she focused on serving immigrant communities, families, and children. CLAUDIA has also worked with undocumented families, refugees, the homeless population, and women survivors of violence, especially dealing with PTSD. She has completed the MDMA-assisted psychotherapy training program through the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, also known as MAPS, and is also trained in the use of ketamine for trauma recovery through the Polaris Institute. She continues to participate in ongoing training and education on the intersectionality of generational trauma, plant medicine science, eco-informed therapy, somatic nervous systems healing, and indigenous knowledge. We're not done yet. CLAUDIA also currently has a private practice in Portland, is the cultural director of the Alma Institute, focusing on providing psilocybin-assisted therapy training programs to underserved and underrepresented communities in the field. She also has been a guest faculty at Lewis and Clark University. Claudia is also committed to continuing to provide ethical, educational, and integrated work to support Indigenous, Black, Brown, immigrant, and 2S LGBTQ+ communities heal and thrive. And last but not least, which I know personally, she is also a recording musician, a beautiful singer-songwriter, and the founder of the Canta Colibri project. Claudia, here we go. She also has twins. No? All right, let's go.
Hello, everyone. Hi, it's good to see you all. I hope you can see me. I was wondering if you could see me. So, thank you, Nathan, for that introduction. It's such an honor to be here with all of you today. As the paradigm of mental health changes and grows, and as money enters Oregon in new ways, we are challenged by many obstacles. How do we, as practitioners, walk the fine line between innovation and responsibility, integrity and ambition, urgency and process? Growing up in Peru as a mixed race with Spanish and indigenous roots, my family has always been part of the fight for indigenous rights and social justice. I learned from very early on that if everyone did not have it, we shouldn't have it either. With an absent father and grandfather incarcerated for many years for their political action and organization, how did those experiences impact me as a child and as an adult in my everyday life now? How does it continue to inspire my work and my walk? I realize in many ways that my father's questions are still mine today, and his dream of new possibilities are mine as well. How do we change the paradigm within the paradigm? As my indigenous Andean elders will say, how do we dream a new dream within the nightmare? We stand aware that we need to propose a new approach in the field, and this might seem as a very ambitious task. A proposal that will allow everyone to benefit from the opportunity to work with these sacred master fungi and will support them in healing personal, familial, and generational trauma. And I ask you here today, I imagine many of you would love to heal some personal, familial, or generational trauma. I think that bounds us all in a commonality. We must know ourselves, to heal ourselves, to align ourselves to purpose, to be of service. A commitment and a saying of one of my dear teachers, Don Victor Estrada, a Chacaruna from the Quero Nation, then it speaks about the cyclical and constant ability to reinvent ourselves over and over and over. A few pillars of this new dream, this new paradigm, are very ancient and simple concepts that have been part of indigenous narratives, history, and culture since time immemorial. Aini, time, the equal and reciprocal symbiotic relationship between everything and everyone. A relationship that also tends to the origin as much as the contemporary. Could we build this movement based on reciprocity? To acknowledge the original people and their legacy, to honor the fight they had to go under to protect and preserve these ways of healing and being, to support their advancements and developments here and now as well, to acknowledge that as we are receiving this gift of knowledge, we must also tend to their demands of clean water, their rights for clean food, good quality education, to build relationships of trust and ask what they might need and especially what they might want from the Western communities. Accessibility and inclusion. How could we ensure these medicines remain available to all? Especially marginalized communities of brown, black, indigenous, immigrants, refugees, and 2S LGBTQ+ communities. And more importantly, how do we commit to the training of a diverse body of practitioners, activists, mental health workers, people that are already in the front lines, working directly with marginalized communities because they are part of these communities themselves, and they know their life depends on it. Our power is in our diversity of care. I want you to take a breath with me right now. Just inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth. And I want you to take a look around the room and tell me if this is the diversity that you want for the movement. Take a look around the room. Wouldn't it be amazing to have different nations and different people in this room, a more diverse room with different walks of life, different wisdom, different lineages? That is possible if we make it a priority. Nature's principles and cycles. Entering and being in the process of growth takes time. As our teachers, the ancient ones say, urgency is a trap. The faster you want to get there, the slower your path will be. Could we commit to increasing our awareness and pay attention to the different and important developmental stages of learning? And as we teach, apply these principles in our process of building and developing a training program? Ultimately, what we do and how we do it will be modeling for students the basic skills of accountability. Can we continue to invest in maintaining integrity to the natural cycles of nature in the learning process? Indigenous ways of knowing and learning. Supporting an education that focuses on the development of the senses and increasing sensitivity to increase awareness. These are indigenous principles and practices. How do we become more sensitive to our environment? The ability to see and look, hear and listen, talk and say are very different skills. The invitation is in the development of a practice that roots and anchors not just intellectual knowledge, but also knowledge of the senses and the ability to strengthen the skill every day. The communion between indigenous peoples and the unseen are guided by this principle. The question of education of the senses is quite complex. Existing programs in various education systems have disregarded this kind of training, and no discipline has been able to fully take charge of this important dimension of human learning. The senses are seen as secondary, less relevant, less important. Senses are not considered part of the learning process as compared to ideas and thoughts which take precedence. This is a little snip of De Lima Santos, a South American researcher. Suma it's aña, to know how to listen in Aymara, in the language of my people. Istaña does not refer only to listening with our ears, instead to perceive, feel, to hear with all of your body. If everything has life, everything is also talking to you at all times. Fernando Wanakuni Mamani. Community and relationship-based. How do we ensure that what students learn is not just words and concepts, but a lived experience? Could we commit to offering relationships that are long-lasting, so a sense of belonging is created and practiced? Not just amongst us, but amongst our master fungi and all the heritage and culture where this comes from. We do not stand for an extractivist model, but instead one where we are in deep relationship with the fungi, plant kingdom, and each other in a relationship of mutual care. Thank you. A new model as well, where people from the communities itself can support others through full and partial scholarships and trainings, so everyone has access to the learning and the healing for themselves, their families, and their communities. Alma proposes an ambitious new paradigm within an obsolete archetype of healthcare. Our communities have many reasons why to mistrust the present healthcare system. Can we make a compromise and we will put people and plant fungi medicines over profit? What would that look like in practical ways in your organizations and our projects? We are honored to be engaging in these conversations and questions and are fully committed to be walking the fine line between innovation and responsibility, integrity and ambition, urgency and process. Muchas gracias. Thank you.
Wow. Claudia has a way of putting me into an altered state of consciousness. Truly. I think if I really internalized urgency as a trap, I think I might actually be a different person. I want to work more on it. I learned so much from you, Claudia. Thank you. All right, and it keeps coming. Here we go. Last but not least for the panel, we have another friend, an amazing individual in Dr. PILAR Hernandez-WOLFE. PILAR is an earth keeper, mestiza curandera who blends indigenous and Western ways of healing, relationship, and ceremony. She is also a descendant of the doctrine of discovery, a descendant of indigenous peoples whose lands were stripped by a papal bull that declared them not human and not worthy of any rights. This left her ancestors, man, some of the bios even get me. This left her ancestors with the great forgetting. She is the living mix of indigenous and Southern European peoples. She is committed to constructing with others. She is also committed to constructing with others the great remembering and to bringing back connection and reciprocity to all beings. Pilar is a tenured professor, a licensed family therapist, and a licensed clinical professional counselor. She has over 25 years of experience working with individuals, couples, and families in therapy. Her work on decolonization and mental health integrates indigenous and Western approaches to healing. She was born and raised in Colombia, South America, where she keeps close links with indigenous networks and teachings. She is fully bilingual in Spanish and English, and just awesome. Pilar, thanks.
Buenos días, ¿cómo están? ¿Cómo estamos, familia? Good morning. I'm going to start with gratitude. Gracias por la invitación. Thank you for this invitation here today. Thank you for being here with us. I want to thank this land that feeds me and helps me thrive. I love this land. I've been here for around 11 years, and I love it. And I also want to thank the land that birthed me and that fed me and that kept me strong until I was strong and big enough to fly on my own. And this is the land that today is called Colombia. So I'm here today to briefly highlight some of the things that I see as possibilities within the Psilocybin Services Act. There are restrictions, there are limitations. We have a box, we're working in that box. And within boxes and within limitations, we learn to navigate and negotiate and find possibilities. And I'll tell you that because I'm an immigrant, and I have been doing that for over 25 years in this land. So I'm grateful for the Act, and I'm grateful for the possibilities that it gives us. And the first thing is that, are we in there? Yeah. The Psilocybin Act is not medical in nature. Psilocybin services under the Act means the facilitation and supervision of a client psilocybin experience. That's it. And to me, that opens a wide door. Because to me, working with the spirit of psilocybin, with the fungi, who is a partner, who is a living being with its own consciousness, who is my guide, it's not only about healing. Healing is great, it's a huge part of it. And it's also about learning, expanding consciousness, and all the possibilities that that involves. So for those of you who I know have been in these journeys for your entire lives, or perhaps more recently, we know that when we engage in a partnership, in a connection with entheogens, and in this case with psilocybin, this is what the Act is, it's only psilocybin, we learn, we expand. And that is a very important part of this Act. The healing part is talked about a lot. It's necessary. I am a clinician. I loved it. And there is much more to this. So what we have to do is ask psilocybin, I believe, ask psilocybin, what else? What are these services? How do we want to envision these services so that we can offer an expansion of consciousness? Not all, in other worlds, but to bring it to the ceremony of life here, so that we go in and out of going to those worlds while also coming to this world, so that we bring that ceremony here and hopefully do it better and come back and do it better. For me, the Act is so broad that to me, it invites the spirit of repair. And the spirit of repair is also a repair with psilocybin. It's repair with nature. It's repair with everyone. With everyone. We are not the only ones. We're not the center of the universe. We are intertwined with everyone around us. And this gives us a possibility to create services that allow for that repair. Let's envision that. The Act created a type of licensed professional. It's a new profession. Welcome. Welcome to the world of regulations. That has pluses and minuses, but welcome. It's limited and narrow in its scope, but it's really important the way it has been drafted, because this is what is allowing equity and diversity to be in the picture. When we have a regulation that allows people with less degrees, then we are creating a door for equity, because it takes a long time, a lot of discipline, a lot of sacrifice, and a lot of other things for people like me to be here talking to you and to be a professor and an author and all the other things I do. There are very few of us, and there is a reason. It's because of, anyway, colonialism and lack of equity and whatnot. So here we have this small window of opportunity to actually allow diverse perspectives, people from really different walks of life, to do this, and a lot of people who know how to do this because they have been doing it for a long, long time. So I welcome that. Now, can those of us who have licenses in other professions practice to be facilitators? I don't know. To be determined. We'll see. I'm going to highlight some of the possibilities I see around training and around service. I believe that around training, the inclusion of historical, traditional, and contemporary practices gives us an opportunity to look at history in a different way. History did not start in the 60s. It's also, psilocybin is not only tied to Mexico and Maria Sabina. I honor that, I respect that, and as you heard Jesse Ulin talking yesterday, it's a part of a huge, large picture. So nobody's constraining us. We can create and envision and look at history and geography and include more, expand, and bring beautiful diversity here. Cultural equity is a big part of the implementation of 109. This is really important because the work that we have been doing in the equity subcommittee of the psilocybin board, advisory board, is actually to work so that this is a point of departure and not an add-on at the end. So we are inviting people, and now ruling, that people think about cultural equity in training and also in service. So there is a cultural equity plan. Why? Because it's not an add-on, because now we have to think about how to do this. Mm-hmm. So I believe that is a great regulation, and I'm happy it's there. I think this is what, to me, the spirit of this act is an example of democracy. It's an example of work towards equity in terms of those possibilities. Okay, I'm almost done with my time. In terms of, so I'm going to jump here. I think in terms of teaching, it's broad. It's broad enough so that at Earth Medicine Center, which is the training that I represent with my colleagues, we will be able to examine what the Western mind offers and what our legacies, lineages with Southern indigenous minds, ancestors brings about. So we want that integration. It's part of what we can do here. I will talk about the importance of end of life tomorrow and cycles. In terms of service, I want to highlight that while a facilitated session has to happen at a licensed service center, well, we still have the possibility of imagining and creating the setting. And we can create beautiful things with that. Again, why don't we ask psilocybin, what would you like? We can do microdosing in a service center. And that is also a beautiful possibility because we can offer microdosings with group counseling, with yoga, with art, with movement. So there is a lot that can happen there. The door is open for creativity. Mm-hmm. At Earth Medicine Center, we're going to emphasize group work because we want to create community, and we live in the healing power of creating community and relationship. Now, relationship, again, it's not only between humans, it's with everybody. Hopefully, dogs will come and be with us. You may imagine I have dogs, so I love them. But it's really with everybody. It's really with everybody. So group work is with everybody, not just us. And the one I want to highlight, the last one I have, is the diversity of practitioners. Mm-hmm. While the landscape looks fairly homogeneous at the moment, I am hopeful that as this movement continues to grow here in Oregon, we have a lot more participation at the table, making decisions of mm-hmm. people who come from marginalized locations. Mm-hmm. And also from all the people, many of who are here, who have very close and beautiful relationships with entheogens and with psilocybin, and who have a lot to offer. So what I envision is that we would have this beautiful, colorful buffet with all these different offerings of tastes and smells, flavors, and colors. And at the very center of this buffet, there would be our beautiful friend, our beautiful guide, the psilocybin mushroom or mushrooms, so that we can all depart, so that we can all share in this meal of love and gratitude and possibility. Thank you.
Thank you, three. I feel very lucky to be here with you right now. And we've got about 15 minutes for questions. If people have more questions that they'd like to ask, you can scan the QR code on the back of your name tag, ask them, upvote, downvote. Just quickly, I wanted to clarify, it sounded like there was a proposal there, PILAR, for dogs to be fast-tracked as licensed practitioners. Just highlighting that for the regulators in the room to consider. Say it again, put your slide up. First question is not a question, but it's one of the more highest voted questions in the forum. There's lunch that is wonderful at a farmer's market out the doors and to the right about 5 blocks. I think that's the PSU farmer's market. So just putting that out there for folks not on their mobile devices. So for folks who are not interested in, or who are excited and interested in taking part in Psilocybin Services, consulting the mushroom, working within this framework, but not for, or rather for spiritual growth or connection or empowering them to lean into their art more, whatever it is that's bringing them joy. How do you envision, and you touched on a little bit, that practice, how do you envision people coming in and maybe the types of service centers that could cater to them or practitioners? It's kind of a broad question.
I think that if we envision our trainings programs and our service centers in a broad way, and people can see that this is about healing, and this is about growth or exploration and learning, there would be an inviting environment for people to be there, for wanting to pay for that services. This has already been happening for many years in Oregon, in the Pacific Northwest, and in many other places. So to me, it starts with how do we make this environment inviting for these varieties of experience, so that there could be potentially conversations between people who have a specific purpose to heal something, but maybe entering conversation with psilocybin and other humans about learning something, about expanding consciousness around that. So I think in the conceptualization of what we call training and what we call service, that just needs to be an integral part of it, not an add-on, but an integral part of it. So that would be a first step.
Beautiful.
Could I add something
Please.
to that? Also, if we look at different cultures all over the world, art is at the center of it all. And art, it has the ability, it is known, to merge worlds between the unseen and the seen. When we are doing something artistic, we are actually not thinking, nor in our brain that is doing cognitive development and cognitive connections, but instead in this more flowy state, which we call non-ordinary states of consciousness many times. So having art at the center will allow us to do work that is deep and then bring the work here to the here and now for people to integrate it in functional ways for their everyday life. So it's a beautiful bridge, and I think a huge important piece of the whole movement. And when I say art, I say all kinds of art, all kinds of painting and drawing and dancing and moving, which are deeply connected with embodiment as well. So embodiment, art making, being in that flow state, and the movement are really good friends. And I think we should continue investigating, proposing, and creating those spaces for those explorations.
Two-part question. This is directed for anybody, but it starts with BARB. Do you know how the Oregon Nursing Board feels about registered nurses, RNs, getting facilitator cross-training? And relatedly, if a nurse is a facilitator, is an Oregon licensed psilocybin practitioner, do they risk losing malpractice insurance, assuming that they have their own policy? So very easy questions for BARB.
Angie Albee might be the better person to talk about the first question. As far as I know, the Oregon State Board of Nursing has not issued any opinions. They haven't come out against it. And as far as the malpractice insurance question, I think it would be that their current insurance would strictly apply to when they are working as a nurse, and it wouldn't apply to any other outside duties. That's my opinion. Everybody would have to check with their individual insurance provider, but that's how I would interpret it.
Great, thank you. Yeah, and to my knowledge, the boards have not a single board has said you cannot also get the licensure, but they have not been proactive in saying, go get them. So that's where we're at. Love this question, rose to the top. What are your visions for how we can create new rituals with fungi that build on indigenous wisdom but are appropriate and applicable for non-indigenous peoples? Another easy one.
Beautiful question. That's a wonderful question, and I think it's a very, very important question of these times. Creating new rituals, for what I hear from all my elders, is all about really going to the origin of learning the rituals that existed before, to understand. We have to know the origin of something before we create a new proposal. Otherwise, the proposal is disconnected from its origin and it loses potency. So the first piece will be, are we willing to study the origin of the different cultures that have held these medicines for so long? You know, the Mazatec communities, for example, that continue to have this unbreakable line for the last 5,000 years of working with psilocybin, niñitos de luz, what they call them, or niños santos. So learning the origin will give us an understanding where then we can create and continue creating, using art, the next generation of that which means the new vision of the now, of the times. But I do believe returning to the origin is what gives potency to this new vision that we are all wanting to birth together, and requires knowledge and experience too. Yeah.
So I'm going to add to what Claudia said. I think there are several efforts that are important in terms of answering this question. It's a complex question, depending on who is asking the question and who is the audience for the question and what land we're in. So I think that situating ourselves is really important in terms of understanding what the answers are and, you know, what questions we're asking. To me, there is a piece about this that has to do with law of origin, and meaning the stories, the creation stories that we all carry, even if we don't think we agree with them, but we live by in the societies we live in, because that punctuates how we live life. And an effort in deconstructing those stories, if that's one's choice, would be perhaps a good choice in order to think about how do we come to ritual and what kind of ritual. There is another part. If we're not the center of the universe, if we are in relationship, if we start from the point of view of relationship, the point of view of relationship with everyone, well, I'm also going to be in conversation with the fungi about this, because they are my guides. And I believe in their wisdom, and I have been guided many times to a lot of answers that I'm seeking. So the wisdom about rituals is also in the plants, in the consciousness of the plants, in the consciousness of the rest of nature. I come back to relationship. Relationship is not only between humans. Relationship is with everyone. I would love if we move it to a more biocentric paradigm and move away from this anthropocentricity we live in. And the last thing I want to say about this, which is our effort at Earth Medicine Center, is that we all need and want, well, I didn't say all, but many of us want and need to engage and create ritual. We have to give ourselves permission to do that. I carry a basket of knowledge. I don't come from a lineage because, as you heard in my introduction, I'm part of what was destroyed. But I'm here, I exist, I'm alive, and I'm recovering the memories and weaving, for me and with others, the rituals, the connections that need to come alive in this particular moment in time. So let us give us permission to weave our own baskets and to put in our baskets with reciprocity how we want to create ceremony in this land with who is here now.
Is it true to say that the work that you all have done on the advisory committee and the equity subcommittee has led to the state requirements now that we teach potential practitioners through training programs like the ones you're developing, or require them to learn the history, at least some of the history? There's hours allotted, required hours. Is that? Yeah. So there's a lot of questions about that, and it's now in statute, thanks to you two, you three, the regulators, everybody, for making that a priority. And so I think a lot of the questions in here are how it will be achieved, or if it will be. We know that it's a requirement, and then it's going to be up to individual programs to figure out how best to do it. A question I really love that's along these lines, let's see if I can find it again. It's about folks with a Western mindset, which, well, maybe I'll come back to it. So there's another question for a really great technical one for Barbara. Will licensees be a priority for individuals who already hold certain degrees in the fields associated, or any qualifications needed? So I think they're asking about if you're going to become a practitioner through 109, through Oregon Psilocybin Services, are you prioritized with previous licensing?
No, and I think that's one of the great things about the rules is that if you graduate from the training program and you get a 75% passing score on the licensing exam, you can be a facilitator. You have to have a high school degree or equivalent, but that's it for training. There's no priority given to physicians or psychiatrists or licensed professional counselors. It's really a level playing field in that regard, I believe.
Thank you. All right, I found it. How can those with a Western mind best approach this learning in ways that can embody the lessons available both from Western and Indigenous histories? And it's a broad question, but I'm curious if you have thoughts on it. And it can be specific to the training programs that you all are working on as well. Yeah. How best can those with a Western mind, best approach this learning of ancient traditions, of our history, specifically our violent history, it sounds like. How can we best learn and embody the lessons available from Western and Indigenous histories? I think maybe they're looking for assigned readings or you have a favorite book?
Well, I mean, it's a good question, and it's a question that in some ways doesn't have an answer for me in these 2 minutes that we have, because there is no rule. obviously, and I wouldn't say there's like a set of these are the 5 things you need to do. Maybe there are, I don't know. What I can say is that to me, I live in both worlds and in different worlds all the time. It's been a journey of navigation and negotiation. It's not one thing or the other. We're here, there is our lives here the way they are, and obviously depending on our social locations and whatnot, we also participate or have the option to participate in other worlds. And we also have options to look for how to be in other experiences with other people in other ways. So it's not something that it's a clear path, where I think we're talking about more, to me, a labyrinth that goes in different ways. And I walk it with learning how to navigate and how to negotiate. One thing that it's just basic and very important is be in relationship, in true, honest, continued relationship with those who are not like you. That's the first thing to start.
I think it's interesting that I often want like a checklist. Like, what's the checklist to further decolonize my mind? That is a Western mindset. So it can be confusing. So thank you for the good answer. I needed that myself. Time's up. One more, or should we call it? All right, only 20 more questions. There's so many good ones, but maybe like a lightning round. What made you all a believer in psilocybin? And I think you can expand to other plant and fungi medicines.
I'll start first. The reason, and again, I've mentioned I've never tried it, but I'm so open to the possibility for what it can do to improve end-of-life care for patients and also the healthcare providers in I guess the neuroplasticity, making you look at life differently. So I applied to serve on the Psilocybin Advisory Board to make sure that hospice and palliative care patients would have a seat at the table.
And to your knowledge, hospice services, this is a question, can become psilocybin service centers, or is there any?
No, still to be determined, but TBD. I don't think so, no.
Okay. All right, a lot of questions are TBD. That's okay. Okay, do you want to answer that question?
Yes, so I think it's a funny question, what made us a believer?
Maybe fall in love.
Yes, yes. So I do believe then, and this has to do with so much what you said, Pilar, also the location, where we come from, how we grew up, what we were exposed to, what were the needs we had that we were able to tend to and then we couldn't tend to. Coming from the South and arriving to this beautiful land and seeing in some ways, the disconnect between mind and heart has been a huge inspiration for me, as well as coming from the lineage I come from, where family has a system where relationships are built, and no matter what, those relationships stand through time. Even with, all the atrocities and all the difficulty that my family and many families in South America have gone through because of incarceration, because of the social movements and the indigenous movements that were so alive in the 70s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, and 90s. So the impact of the war on drugs in South America. So in some ways, arriving to this country and seeing the incredible potential as well as the disconnect has been and continues to be a huge inspiration to say, wait, we're missing something here. There is so much possibility. What could we do to continue educating ourselves? And I do go back to the principle of one of my teachers, which I think it serves often so much of know yourself, deeply know yourself, to heal yourself, to align yourself to your purpose, ultimately to be of service. No, it's not ultimately to be better. It's actually ultimately to work for the bigger wellness of the planet, of us all. So how do we continue getting back to those knowledges that somehow guide our path and our way? And in this movement, the possibilities we have to create a new paradigm. I am inspired beyond what I can tell you about that, as well as I know it's super ambitious, so we do have to come together and be in dialogue, so relationship is at the forefront of that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, entheogens and psilocybin changed my life a long time ago, completely. And I'm grateful, and this is why I'm here today. It's a gift that I want to share with everyone. And ultimately, I am here doing this because I believe that it is time for the eagle and the condor to fly together again.
You want to lead us in a breath, Claudia, just to end the session?
Sure, we can just take a breath.
How do we do it?
What?
I asked how to do it.
Oh, how to do it. Oh, you're doing great. I saw that, chest puffing up and then releasing. Good.
Nailing it. Thank you. All right, what a rock star panel. We have more to come. Lunch ends at 2:30. Come back. Thank you all so much. Thank you.